The National Investor's motto is, you can get information anywhere, but here you get knowledge. And for well over 40 years now, Chris Temple has imparted that knowledge, an unparalleled, understandable, and useful take on the big picture of the markets and of our world. He has been out in front of what you see on the news every day on many themes. More, Chris has taken this macro knowledge and his unique analytical abilities to uncover unique investment opportunities. Often he has guided his members to big winners in resources, biotech stocks, and more. His talents and connections often getting him into ground floor opportunities before they are discovered. Without further ado, here is Chris with today's topic.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Chris Temple, and today you're going to hear one of the more unique stories in the gold space you've probably ever run across, and that is a story in two parts, as you're going to learn, of Omineca Mining Metals Limited. Omineca is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol OMM, and here in the U.S. on the OTCQB under the symbol OMMSF. It's a stock and a company that I first recommended about 5 years or so ago now. Got off to a gangbuster start as far as the share price, a lot of promise, but then between COVID, supply chains, a lot of other challenges and delays, you've seen the share price basically do a round trip, as we're going to talk about. But the gold has always been there, the promise has always been there, and most important, the management is a management team that I have had utmost confidence in based on, among other things, a 30-plus year relationship with the family of CEO Tom MacNeill. Now, before I bring Tom on, a couple of the usual preliminaries. First of all, either he or I might be making what could be construed as forward-looking statements. Understand that. Understand there's risk involved. Secondly, at National Investor Publishing, we recommend companies based on their merits. We don't get paid to make recommendations. Such was the case several years ago with Omineca, but from time to time after that, we are compensated by some of the companies that we've already recommended to do media work, copywriting, and so forth, of which this video is one example. And so be aware that Omineca has compensated National Investor Publishing for this augmented exposure to the public, the investment community, etc. Now, among the ingredients you look for in a resource project, whether it's gold or whatever it might be, or really with any startup type of a company, any small cap or story stock, you're looking for a combination of things. You're looking for assets, ingenuity, science, location, all of that. But the big one really is management. And I've stressed the theme time and again that especially when you have a proven jockey, or in this case, a family of jockeys, you tend to want to bet on them again and again. And it's been my privilege for well over 30 years to be friends with the MacNeill family based in Saskatchewan in Canada. It started way back actually in the late 80s when I made a trip to Canada, to Saskatchewan, and saw the beginning days of this little gold mine called the CB. In northern part of the province. It was owned at that time by a company called Claude Resources. Its founder and chairman, Bill MacNeill, you see here in the middle with his wife, and flanked by Tom and Ken and John in the early days, from left to right here on your screen, his three sons. This was when they were starting to build the head frame at CB, and then some years later you see here kind of a reenactment photo. Tom didn't make it. His daughter was there, who's a geologist herself. But that was the second photo, is when they commemorated the 1 millionth ounce of gold that came out of CB. One of the nicest little projects I've ever visited. I was there a few different times over in years past. And true to Bill's vision that this was the beginning of a district, several years back, the company was sold to SSR Mining, who has come in and since then doubled the production and done a lot of other things. So my experience with Bill early on was that this was a salt-of-the-earth guy. He was a dear friend and colleague in the industry. I miss him terribly. He passed away a couple of years ago. But it didn't end. It start and end with Bill. Ken, about the time I got to know the family a little bit better, they Ken was years ago the CEO of a little company called Shore Gold, which subsequently changed its name to Star Diamond. I won't get into that whole story, but that's not why we're here today. But Shore Gold became one of the top 10 best recommendations ever in the National Investor, something like a 60-fold increase in share price from when we first got in, before anybody heard of this story, to when we started to sell most of our position. And then that brings us to today, to Tom, who he and his dad, as you're going to hear him explain, came onto the Wingdam project a generation ago. And it's been very slow to evolve, but it's one of the more unique and exciting things I've ever heard of in my life. And it's something that I have stuck through thick and thin over the last few years. And again, a lot of delays, some disappointments, weather problems, COVID problems, everything as Tom is going to recount. But finally, as we're recording this here in mid-October of 2024, looking on a couple of different fronts as though our patience may be shortly rewarded. And here he is joining me from the beautiful city, which I haven't been to in a while, but I've been there a few times, of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. The MacNeill family corporate headquarters, so to speak, is Tom MacNeill. Tom, glad you could be with me today.
Hi, Chris, and always a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, there's one of the slides I've used in the past in talking about Omineca since back when I recommended it about 5 or so years ago in the National Investor, is this one here. I'll put it up on a screen. In fact, the new Caribou Gold Rush, which you're a part of, a couple other companies are a part of, most notably in recent years, the Barkerville success, which Cisco bought out a few years back. Big multi-million ounce gold deposit a little bit east of you guys. But give us a little bit of a rundown of the history of the Caribou. This is an area which, when I got to learn more about it from you a few years back, as I was getting more familiar with Omineca's story, this is one of the top spots ever in the world for how rich the placer gold deposits in various places were.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gold was first discovered in 1859, and the history of the Caribou is largely helps define British Columbia and why it became a part of the Dominion of Canada. There was concern in the 1860s, rather, that the rich gold fields were going to bring U.S. citizens up to the extent that the border would disappear between the United States, or what was then the British colony of British Columbia, and the U.S. So it's fascinating. Yes, millions and millions of dollars of gold recovered out of both Lightning Creek and Williams Creek to the east of us over by Barkerville and the entire region. But it's been a bit of a mystery. It took, I guess it was about 60 years before the first serious lode gold mining started, discovered in 1923, and then mining started in the 1930s over near Barkerville, or Wells, technically, in the Caribou Gold Quartz mine. So it's a different area, incredibly rich, orogenic gold fields, world-class in size, but disguised by incredible overburden from the glacial till that settled after the last couple of glaciers on top of it and disguised everything, and some of the tightest conifers you've ever seen. I mean, the trees are just right next to each other, which makes exploration pretty difficult out there. No,
Well, I'm
thankfully.
sure, and that's been a challenge to you and a lot of other people over the years. You mentioned the hard rock and lode gold. That's been more the more recent discoveries, like what Barkerville / Cisco has. We're going to get to that later because that's an evolving second big part of your story. But sticking with the placer theme, and now your underground paleoplacer resource that you're hopefully after a lot of delays and whatnot ready to exploit. For a lot of decades, there were people in the past who realized, okay, we've got all the easy to get stuff that's in the visible streams that we see today. We're recovering that gold. But because of all the different shifts over time, seismic activity, geological activity, whatever else, there's a lot of what I guess you'd call buried stream beds that aren't on the surface of the ground. This is what your focus is, of course, at Wingdam, this underground paleo placer channel, which I guess total runs for what, 17 kilometers, this underground stream?
Well, we've got 2.5 kilometers that have been drill indicated that they're gold bearing over a 2.5 kilometer stretch. We have 17 kilometers of the placer claims that theoretically could have that gold bearing channel under it. We haven't proved that yet. So
Okay. But back, for decades, people tried to figure out how to get into there and get some of that gold out, and everybody ran into trouble because of, not good conditions, not stable conditions. Of course, when you're going under the glacial till and where there's water involved, it's a challenge. But you guys checked a big box back in 2012 when you're able to figure out a way with one small section of that stream to go in there and recover a fair amount of gold at the time. And that was what started to get everybody, including yourself, of course, excited about this. How did you come about figuring out how to do this, Tom?
Well, actually, we brought technology from Saskatchewan. This ties into activities that my family was involved with the CB mine in Saskatchewan back in the 1990s when it started up in 1991. Al Basham was the mine manager, and a fellow named Ned Reed, who's both of them have passed away, actually. Ned Reed was the VP exploration and lead geologist at Claude Resources. So we had two guys from CB that coincidentally ended up working together in Saskatchewan here. And Ned, in semi-retirement, went out to British Columbia to work for International Wayside Gold with Frank Callahan. And that brought my father and mine's attention to that area. And we were early stage investors in what is now Osisko Development's very large project next door to us. So we've been familiar with the area for a generation, really. And basically Ned said, look, this is real, it's big, it's in the Caribou, Frank's onto something, and it's turned into what is now, I think, about 6 million relatively high grade ounces, and they're building a 4,000 ton per day concentrator at Wells, Osisko Development is. So Ned had worked with Al Basham, who was the mine manager at CB. Now, Al is the one who drove the ramp in 1991 for a mining contractor into the Wingdam deposit. And these guys were working together out in the Caribou and came to me and said, look, this is a really interesting project, Tom. You should get involved with it. It's real and it's got lots of potential. So we did on the back of their recommendation. Now, unfortunately, as I said, both of those fellows have passed away. Really good guys, excellent explorationist and miner. And we've got a project that in 2012, what we wanted to do, and again, getting back to where we brought technology from Saskatchewan, we wanted to prove that this was as rich as the historical record said it was. There was anecdotal evidence that in the 1930s, when they initiated mining in unsuccessful attempts, that they were literally taking shovels full that you could see the gold in the placer gold in the shovel, and it was that rich. And we thought, okay, well, we can spend millions of dollars drilling a bunch of holes and get an idea, or we can rely on the historical drilling record and just go down the decline that was there already and freeze it. Let's ignore, or not ignore, but let's mediate or remediate all of the challenges. Mitigate, I guess, is the best term. Mitigate the challenges of mining by freezing it. Now, Al Basham had been sinking 2 shafts in Saskatchewan for diamond exploration in an affiliated company of ours, and he was working with Tyson Mining, and they're the world experts in freeze mining. So we said, okay, let's take that technology out here, turn it on its side, go across the channel by drilling a bunch of holes, putting freeze pipe in, freeze it, and we can go in and access it without fear. And we did that. And we had an expectation of what we thought the drilling record should have told us we would get. And we expected to get about 100 ounces of gold if it was as rich as we thought it was. In reality, we got 173 ounces. So we were very pleasantly surprised that it actually exceeded our expectations and was genuinely as rich as the historical record of activity had said it was. So,
and Tom, this was 173 ounces of gold out of just a little bit of a tunnel, for lack of a better term, just one little shot.
Well, to put it in context, yeah, there's historical drilling over 2.5 kilometers of this, and we went across basically 2.4 meters, 1/1000th of that. So we went, if this is the paleo channel, we did one cut across it in an 8-foot wide by 8-foot high and 80-foot long crosscut. So 2.4 meters by 2.4 meters by 24 meters. And we got 173 ounces. So you have to put that in context. That means that on average, every time in that crosscut that we went forward a meter, we got 7 ounces of gold. And the really extraordinary part is 75% of that gold came from 5 meters in the middle. So it starts out relatively skinny and it gets richer and richer and richer. In the middle, it was running like up to 5 ounces per cubic yard. So picture something the size of your desk having 5 ounces of gold in it. I mean, that's extraordinary. So the mining plan that we have in the grand scheme of things is not to do slices, crosscuts all the way. It's to do a crosscut every so often and then join up the middles to basically go down the gut of the channel.
Right.
And that's what our partners have been developing so far. So extraordinary project. really
Yeah,
is.
and so after that success and that recovery of gold in 2012, when you and I have talked about this in the past, unfortunately at that time, gold had already peaked in price the prior year. Gold stocks were declining, and you made the decision, properly so, that okay, the market has turned the other way now. Maybe we won't get enough excitement or funding for this thing. We're going to sit on it for a while and see what happens. And folks, I want to remind you again that on Omineca's website, and let alone if you do a search on the internet about this whole region, you're going to find a wealth of information about the history of the caribou, specifically on Omineca's site, the history of Wingdam specifically, and all the work that's been done by them and others in the past. So make sure you do, spend some time there when you're through watching this video. But so Tom, you went forward several years. Then things started looking good. The gold market was percolating a little bit more, starting about 4 or 5 years ago. And you were able to bring in a partner who, added a lot of what you didn't have as far as the ingredients to really kick this thing off again. So tell us about, we're going back to what, the 2020 time frame, how this deal came about to bring in this partner that's doing a lot of the work, and what your financial arrangement is with them.
We had been introduced to Ken Hamilton with HCC Mining and Demolition out of Saskatoon here, which was something I found appealing because when you've got people working out of the same city, you can meet a lot easier. And what we were looking for from Ken as an introduction was mining equipment and possibly some funding, kind of pay-as-you-go work to get the project underway. We had the intention of taking it to production starting in 2020, really. And it was Ken's idea to say, look, that's nice and all, and I've got all of the equipment you need here, and we can develop a mining contract. But how about this? How about if I go mine it, no cost to you? I develop pre-development, get it up and operational. I mine it. I'll keep half the gold. I'll give you your half. And we shook on what at that time we thought was a reasonable expectation of cost, which was $850 Canadian per ounce. So we ruminated on that and thought, that's actually a pretty good deal. It's non-dilutive to Omineca shareholders. We're going to give up half the project, but we're not going to have any outlay to get it into a recovery where we're recovering placer gold. And basically, we know what it'll cost us, $850 per ounce. So it seemed like a really good deal at the time, and it is a good deal. Ran into some troubles right away in that Ken and his group started doing all of the development work, doing great work, but then had an internal struggle within their own company that put things on hiatus. And what that meant was, unfortunately, Ken found himself outside of his own private company and forced to do this on his own. And so at that point, he brought in another partner as a subcontractor to continue developing it forward. That would be in 2022. They got about as far as they could go until they ran into their own struggles between them. And at that point, the largest funder of that relationship stepped forward and said, look, let's move this thing forward. Could you guys please step aside? I'll take it over. And that's how, under the same banner, effectively, we have David Dukavich and DNL Mining moving the project forward on the same terms as we had before, which is they go mine it, pull out whatever gold comes out of it, give us our half, tack a bill for $850 Canadian, by the way, $850 Canadian per ounce, and we've got $3,660 gold this morning, and deliver us our gold. So we're just on the verge of that. It's been an interesting ride. So without sounding whiny or complainy, we started dewatering in late 2020. And when the pump started up in 2021, we had floods in the Caribou, literally once in 50-year floods out there. So our settling ponds were full, and that slowed us up all through the summer of 2021, at which time COVID mania was setting in. So we had a tough time even keeping the miners in camp and doing all of the things under the regulations. The following summer, when we finally got operational again, fires swept through the area, which slowed things down. You add that to the operational challenges the partnership group we're having. This has been painful for us, to say the least, and certainly for our shareholders, because we've seen the stock suffer from these incredible delays.
Well, more than once along the way, and you and I keep in touch on a fairly regular basis. We have for a long time, as I used to do with your late dad, who was a blast to visit with on all different kinds of things in the industry and whatnot. And I know along the way that it's been torture. I mean, you got something sitting right in front of you, and damn, what else can go wrong? Why doesn't this Murphy guy leave us alone?
There's a high side, though, Chris, is that in the time since we shook on the agreement, literally the price of gold has more than doubled. So we had to give away half the project, and now we've recovered all. We
Now
had
you kind of got
1,700.
it back. That's right. That is one
We
cool
did.
consolation prize. So
Yeah.
after
And
all of this, after all the delays, a big round trip in the stock price, there was a lot of excitement when myself and some others were covering it and got on board. And I've told people, I said, look, I might have lost patience if I have not known this family, and this family has not done well by me and my subscribers for 3+ decades now. And that's one of the most important things, as I said at the outset before you came on, that when you've got good projects and you've got good, honest, diligent people, eventually the two are going to come together at the same time with all the other circumstances that are needed. And I've always believed that. And of course, I still do. So all of that said, 2024 has brought some new excitement and some momentum, still not reflected much in the share price, which really isn't that unusual right now. One of the crazy things about this gold market with the record gold price that we've had, many new records during 2024, most of the smaller cap resource exploration companies have kind of sat still. I mean, the big boys, continue to do fairly well in the market, but this is still not a move that's caught up to the stocks yet. But operationally, things have been doing better. During the year, you have made a series of announcements. I've been running through them here on the screen. You restarted things back in January. In February, you had some initial gold recovery. In May, another announcement of you're getting everything together, and I'm going to have you update us on that in just a second. And one of the really cool things we're going to come back to later is one of the drill holes that you did, because that's going to inform your hard rock exploration, which we'll get to in just a second. But before we get to that, Tom, as of now, tell us where things are at. I know you've got multiple incursions into the paleo channel. You're waiting on just a couple of other ingredients, hopefully in the next few weeks or so. And then, by all appearances, nothing else goes wrong. You're going to be pulling some gold. So let us know what we can see, hopefully in the coming few weeks or so.
should be that simple, I hope.
Yeah.
Where we're at, basically, David Ducavich spent the latter part of 2023 getting his ducks in a row for starting mining operations under his own banner. Again, on the same deal that we had with HCC Mining and Demolition. They started in January, literally January 1st of this year, doing the grouted spiling plan. We have a mine plan that has two things in it. One's grouted spiling, one's tunnel liner plate. We had that formulated a couple of years ago in anticipation of the moment we're in now. So they started the grouted spiling. And what that means is they were, without getting too technical, drilling metal rods in and encasing them in grout to create a tunnel before you excavate. So it basically keeps that unconsolidated wet material at bay and gives you a tunnel, and then you pull the material out. And then as you go, you use shotcrete to spray on the surface to create a permanent tunnel as you go. It's a mine plan designed for this paleo channel for wet, unconsolidated material that wants to come at you, that wants to ooze like toothpaste. They started doing that, as you said, made a couple of incursions into it and stopped with the idea of doing a haulage drift alongside the paleo channel, because we always have to have an access tunnel that runs alongside the gold-bearing paleo channel, just so that you can get into it and out of it and for mining activities. It was working very well until the rain started up in May. We had a drought in the first part of the year, but all summer long it rained again, uncharacteristic in this region to have it that wet in the summer. And the miners looked at it and said, look, we don't want to go into the paleo channel when it's raining, because the bedrock is very porous, it's fractured. And when it rains, the water comes down the bedrock and makes its way to the lowest point, which is the paleo channel. So they spent literally a couple of months developing 70+ meters of haulage drift alongside it. And finally, the rain stopped enough that they said, okay, let's go back in and let's develop the crosscut. They had a couple of them open and ready to go already, but bulkheaded off. And they said, let's go in and go mining now. Did another one, got to the paleo channel, everybody kind of anxious, bated breath, thinking it's going to be very wet, it's going to be challenging. They got in and they started drilling the spilings in once they got to the bedrock contact. So where bedrock turns to gravels and pay gravels, they got to the bedrock contact and they were going to drill the spilings in, and it was like, we can't do it. We cannot drill them. It's too dry. So that's the sort of the best bad news, good news thing we've had happen in years on this project is we had a mine plan that was set to deal with something that turned out not to be there. And we figured out why. And that's that the haulage drift alongside of it, the end of which dips a couple meters lower than the paleo channel, acted as a catchment for water. So all of that water that would normally be coming down the steep canyon bedrock and going into the paleo channel was stopped up by the access drift that they made. So that's a hooray moment. We looked at it and went, great. We can turn the page over from the rather complicated and expensive drilling spilings in. And again, these are expenses on the DNL side, not Omineca. But we can turn that page and go to tunnel liner plate. And what that means is this project just got a whole lot simpler, which is simply dig a hole and put in sheet plate as you go in 18-inch wide sections. You're excavating a little bit, putting in a sheet of plate. You literally bolt it together. And when you're done doing that, as you advance forward, you've got what looks like any culvert under any road. It's the corrugated steel, in our case, 3 gauge, so 6.5 millimeter thick steel that goes in and supports everything. And being able to do that is transformational for this project. It makes it a relatively simple excavation. You're relying on the material that you're going into to stand up long enough for you to dig it out. And we've proved that it does have the stand-up time in the access points that were made using spilings. We've got photos of the material standing up very well for long periods of time. So that's where we're at right now. It's been, again, yet another delay, as frustrating as that is, but it's a good kind of delay this time. So the steel was ordered some time ago. We're expecting delivery on site near the end of the month here. It's supposed to be on a truck by the 25th, we're told. So we'll see that as it be that as it may. It should show up by the end of the month. DNL Mining has had to change gears a little bit and switch from traditional miners with familiarity in drilling spilings in and doing shotcrete to miners who have underground tunneling expertise with tunnel liner plate and underground construction of that nature. So David is always as good as his word, and he's arranged a supervision and a crew to come out by the end of the month to be ready to do just that. So if everything comes together, steel shows up by the end of the month, miners on site, all the equipment's being rehabilitated and made ready to go so that we can be operational as quickly as possible. In theory, and I hate making predictions, especially on this project, but in theory, in early November, they can be pulling out gold. And we know that they're at the paleo channel because where they went into to start putting the spilings in has the open face. There's about 5 feet of bedrock and about 3 feet of pay gravels. And as they advance forward, it'll become less and less bedrock and more pay gravels. And we know that they're gold bearing because we've already recovered gold from that. So
that's cool. So we all say our prayers to keep our fingers crossed that everything this last little bit before pay dirt is finally hitting some good quantity. I want to go into the second part of Omineca's story because one of the reasons, folks, I made the comments I did before I brought Tom on, that it's been a joy dealing with this family for years, is that they're always very understated. A lot of times in dealing with small cap executives, whether it's resources or others, there's guys trying to, and gals sometimes trying to blow smoke up my dress, so to speak, and give me a big song and dance and overpromise. And you guys, you and Ken, way back in the early days of Shore Gold, before he made his huge diamond discovery, became one of my all-time best recommendations. And your dad also. I mean, you're very methodical, very matter of fact. You don't get real excited. It's just, very simple meat potatoes kind of stuff. The most excited I ever heard you in my life was when the light bulb was going off over your head a few years ago, because everybody knows that this placer gold, whether it's what's already been recovered above ground in streams or in a paleo channel, it got ripped off from someplace, some type of deposit. The question is where. And that's a hunt that's been going on for a long time too, but you've narrowed that down quite a bit. And that's the other big part of Omineca's story, is the exploration work that you're doing. So tell us about the one drill hole that you announced a few months back and how that's informed where and I think you're about to start drilling some exploration holes for a potential hard rock source of some of this gold. Tell us how that came about.
Well, one of the things that we've known for a long time is this placer deposit seems to get richer as you go downstream, which is counterintuitive. We have got sniffs of lode gold when we've been drilling in the vicinity. Now, one of the somewhat frustrating things is we have always had a theory that the gold, the actual lode deposits are downstream of where this is, which is, most people would say nonsense because gold travels down fluvial channels. It travels downriver when it's eroded. But we have been doing a lot of prospecting near the Eureka Thrust Fault. And without getting too technical, we're in an orogenic gold system. The Barkerville camp is part of an orogenic gold system. And that just simply means gold deposits that are formed while mountains are building. So as the ground is being accordioned, compressed, if you will, because the plates are pushing together, it creates mountain ranges. And those mountain ranges give all of the structure, the fractures and whatnot that are fluid pathways for ore forming fluids to come in and create gold deposits. Barkerville is just that. They've got on their side of the Barkerville terrain, there is the Pandata Thrust Fault and the Pleasant Valley Thrust Fault. So two thrust faults, picture them like a hand squeezing the accordion. And on our side, we have the Eureka Thrust Fault and the Spanish Thrust Fault. So the other hands on this side squeezing it together. Now, on those edges where those thrust faults are, that's where orogenic gold deposits form. So that's why there's an entire belt about 15 kilometers long on the Barkerville side. With right now, they've got, I believe, 6 deposits that they've identified and are developing along a trend, and it runs parallel to the thrust fault system. We expect to have the same thing on our side, but for 100 years, this hard rock exploration in this area has been flummoxed by the fact that everybody traditionally looks upstream. You've got a placer deposit, you go, well, it came from somewhere up there, and one of the things that's happened is on our side, the relatively softer metavolcanic and sandstone type rocks on the Quesnel terrain have seemed to have eroded quicker than where we are at Wingdam. So there's probably a mountain range that used to exist that doesn't exist anymore. And we know a few other things, and I don't want to be too long-winded, but we know a few other things that in the Eocene, so just a few million years ago even, the Fraser River used to run north. It runs south down out to Vancouver, but there was a time not too long ago when it ran north up toward Alaska. And in fact, the entire watershed flowed north. But things that change, they change for a variety of reasons, tectonically because of those plates moving together, changing elevations. The simple weight of glaciers, when you've got a couple kilometers of ice overhead in a glacial period, it causes the actual landmass to compress on top of the lithosphere. And so it changes. And when it melts and bounces back, it doesn't always come back the same, and so it can change how things are. It's like anything. You stretch a rubber band, it doesn't go back exactly the way it was. So we have long thought that probably the water flowed to the east at Wingdam. The Lightning Creek, as it's cut now, is a relatively new feature. And the implication is the gold source is actually downstream and affiliated with the Eureka Thrust Fault. Now, the good news is this, a couple of things. Yes, when I got really excited about some certain things, we have, as part of the gold that we've recovered, we have autochthonous gold, which simply means placer gold that has broken off its lode source literally in the immediate vicinity. So we've always been looking for something very close. We've got the Eureka Thrust Fault right there, which is a primary fluid pathway. We've got a lot of gold there, which is the best indicator that there's a lode source. And we know that in orogenic systems worldwide, this is a repeating feature worldwide in orogenic gold systems, they happen to be within a kilometer either side of the primary tectonic feature, in our case, the Eureka Thrust Fault. Well, we've investigated upstream, around the clock upstream. We've drilled over 30 holes into the geological signatures that could host structures, really got some sniffs, but didn't see much. But the closer we've gotten to the Eureka Thrust Fault, the more smoke we've seen, essentially. And right now, we're isolating that area.
And that fancy word you use, autochthonous, is that it, Tom?
Yeah, autochthonous, and it's simply a Latin term for nearby, next to.
Yeah,
So,
and simply, folks, without getting lost in a $12 word, that means that when you look at the grains, the nuggets and whatnot of gold, that you've got sharp edges. It's clear that it's broken away from something. They're not rounded edges, and signifying that it's been traveling over many miles and beaten up by other things and water and whatnot. So this is freshly, for lack of a better
right.
term, freshly
Yeah.
broken off gold. Didn't go very far.
And now this adds to the whole mystery that is Wingdam. Yes, we have autochthonous gold. There's pictures on our website, gold Hackley nuggets, so very jagged with quartz inclusions in them still. So still with some of the country rock attached to it. But somewhat more importantly, even all of the gold. And Steve Kosis, our lead geologist, has been 40 years in the Caribou, and he's a placer expert, probably one of the world's best placer experts. All of the gold that we recovered from our bulk sample, by his estimation, came from less than a kilometer from its source. So that's, and again, that's gold grain morphology. That's looking at the grains as you explained, Chris, and determining how far they've traveled. Very simply, the further gold travels in a stream, a few things happen. One, it gets pounded flat because the pebbles bounce off it. Other inclusions get knocked out of it, so it gets purer and it gets smaller. And so you can tell by how round it is, how big it is, and the nature of it, and does it have other inclusions and stuff, how close it is to source. And there's a scale for that. It's called the Caillou scale.
Right.
You can literally grade whether it's 100 meters, 300 meters, a half a kilometer, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 20, or infinitely small that's traveled an unknown distance. We're very confident that we're right next to the source, but that's the mystery of Wingdam. One, we believe the source is downstream because the water used to flow the other way. And we also have this problem in that the Wingdam deposit is in the Lightning Creek Valley, so it's a steep valley, and the placer gold's down at the bottom of it, and it's got 50 meters of overburden over top of it, right? So we're mining, and Lightning Creek is up here now. Well, back a long time ago, Lightning Creek was cutting the valley floor, cutting the bedrock, and it was taking gold from somewhere in the sides and putting it into the bottom. And it's our presumption that it was just barely tapping into a deposit down at this level. And as the creek slowed down and time went on, the canyon starts to fall in. You have rock slides and whatnot. The canyon falls in, covers up the gold deposits, and starts elevating just through simple erosion of the sides. And that's how you end up with Lightning Creek up 50 meters above down here. So long story short, if Lightning Creek used to flow to the east, the deposits, one or more of them is downstream. And if they only were tapped into briefly and then covered up, how are we ever going to find it? It doesn't outcrop its surface. We're only ever going to find sniffs of it, and that's basically been our experience. So as again, counterintuitive as it sounds, because we haven't found anything at surface and we know the gold didn't travel very far, it has to be there. It has to be under the overburden.
Well, you mentioned Steve Kosis a minute ago. There's a cool picture that Dean Nawada, who's on the right in this picture, sent me a while ago of on one area at surface where you can see how this rock folded up in that. So to what you're talking about, there's been a lot of changes in the structure of all of this over time. And this is the kind of thing you're looking for where there's been violent activity, be it seismic or tectonic. And that's where gold deposits come from. It's that from what's boiling up underneath, and where can it go?
It is. And when we did some placer drilling downstream here, it might have been a couple placer holes you were talking about. In October last year, our partners and us put 2 holes into a theoretical depression in the paleo channel. We wanted to see if it really represented what we thought it was. Now, in the placer gold, so going back to the placer gold, when we did that bulk sample, we had a pay interval. So the gravel's at the bottom of the channel, about 1 meter thick, and then you get gold out of the bedrock fractures because it's been jammed into them. So we had about a 1 to 1.5 meter intercept of gold-bearing gravels when we went across that channel. Downstream, 70 meters downstream, and this is one of the reasons they were doing the haulage drift to get down to this area, to start mining down there. We drilled a couple of holes to see if there really was a bedrock depression that could carry more gold. And we got over 8 meters of high-grade gold in the placer. And on another one drilled next to it over, I think it was 3.5 meters of high-grade placer near the edge of the channel. So it seems to us from that indication that the deposit is likely getting richer as you go downstream, which makes sense because placer deposits get richer as you get closer to the source. So we're on all fronts here. We're pretty excited about drilling in the valley near the Eureka Thrust Fault. Now, of course, we're drilling somewhat blind based on geophysics. Because till sampling doesn't tell us much because it's fresh till from the glacial period, so it's not really giving you a lot of indication of the bedrock. But we've done a very low level geophysical survey. We did a treetop level drone survey. So picture a drone flying with a magnetometer. We did it on 25 meter spaces to give us the best definition of geophysics that could show structure, possible. And that's what we're drilling off this fall and hopefully starting soon here. We really think we're onto something. We've got all of the pieces of the puzzle. Eureka thrust fault, high-grade placer deposit, seems to be getting richer downstream, at least as per the limited drilling that's been done in the very recent area. Every time we drilled a hole getting closer to the Eureka thrust fault, we got more sniffs of gold, and our prospecting has given us the biggest kicks that we've seen along the Eureka thrust fault. So Occam's razor is starting to tell us it's probably what we think. It's downstream, it's under the channel. It probably only ever got eroded a little bit. And that would be great news, because if it only got eroded a little bit and put that much gold into the placer-bearing the gold-bearing channel, then that means there's a whole lot of other gold still there.
Could be. Well, hopefully before too long, we're going to be finding out. So, folks, this is one of the more, some people call it offbeat, you can call it unique stories you're ever going to hear of in a gold space. This is very, very different. And you have not one, but two major kicks at the can here. One where everything seems to finally be coming together for the underground paleoplacer recovery. The amount of gold that we might see from this, I've done a couple of estimates before based on what you did. I mean, your recoveries could very well dwarf what the current share price is, just your cut of it, let alone if you score sooner rather than later as far as drilling around there for the lode source of gold. So still, folks, this is you know, a risky business. There's a lot of delays, as we've already seen the last few years, that can happen to these things, but it might finally be time, Tom.
Well, we're there, Chris.
Yeah.
November could be great for us. If we start recovery on the placer, that could be marvelous. And for clarity, the lode gold scenario, that is arguably the bigger picture, because these deposits tend to be very big. There's millions of ounces on the other side, you know, probably in excess of 10 million ounces on the Barkerville side. And we would have a similar, we hope we would have a similar type of orogenic system. So once we tag into the first high grade gold intercept in the hard rock drilling program, this will change Omineca. So we have a high level of confidence.
Yeah, and folks, you saw earlier when I put up the chart how things started to take off when the story first came out, and then all the different delays and COVID and supply problems and even being able to travel to this site, all of that took us right back almost a round trip. But if one or both of these things pay off, I think you'll see a response that exceeds things, especially once you start recovering gold, because even in a market where gold itself, as we said a few minutes ago, is at records, a lot of retail investors still really aren't that involved yet. It's only been in the last few months or so that Western investors at all got even into the big cap gold ETFs and whatnot. I think that's a trend that's going to continue, as I explain in my new special issue on precious metals, in which I have some added information on Omineca. But a lot of people who do start to tiptoe into this area are going to want to respond to stories where it's the old adage, show me the money. And so this is something where you could see a sea change in attitude toward Omineca almost literally overnight. So we're all pulling for you. I certainly am, as a shareholder and a friend, and happy that we're finally at this point, Tom. So folks, we're waiting for news on the recovery. We're waiting for the drilling. And just to clarify, I know you've already permitted for those drill holes that you're going to do. You've got a little bit more prep work to do.
There, we have to cross Wingdam Creek, which is one of the tributaries that flows into Lightning Creek. That's happening as we speak here. The drill theoretically can be turning mid next week.
Cool.
And we've the first 8 targets, and as I said, we've got a high level of confidence. We're excited as anybody can be about doing this. We're going to drill down the valley over a 1 kilometer distance. I'll be very surprised if we don't hit something, given what we believe we know about this.
Exciting stuff, folks. And so again, make sure that you keep in touch with both Omineca. Go to their website, follow them on social media, keep up with yours truly. Of course, anytime news comes out, you'll be hearing it from both of us. And Tom, I'm looking forward to the next several weeks, month or two, whatever it takes. This can be some really, really fun times that will be a payoff, we hope, for a lot of patience that we've all invested. Nobody more than yourself.
We have to thank our shareholders for getting through this with us. It's been painful, but we're on the cusp of what we think are great things. And Chris, thank you very much for the time today. Really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, and we'll be back, folks. Once some substantive news does come out following this, we'll have Tom back, of course. So Tom, thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye.
For much more of the National Investor's cutting-edge content and actionable investment opportunities, make sure to subscribe to Chris's free content at nationalinvestor.com. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel too. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.